Tech Talk, episode number 21. Today, we got on my man Roey from Obligo. Let me tell you something. When you bring a fighter pilot with a physicist and you bring them together, what do you get? You get real solutions that matter in real life. This is about multifamily problem that we all deal with. The deposit. The landlord can't make money off it. He doesn't want to deal with the administration. The tenant who's losing money every day doesn't want to put up more money. They came into that and are building trust within that space. You know who else built trust and made a really big business? Uber and Airbnb. So sit down, listen to what this guy has to say, because he has changed that marketplace and his penetration is like 20% and only going through the roof. These are the technologies that make a change. These are the people we want to meet on Real Tech Talk so that you understand what's happening in the marketplace so you don't get left behind. Sit down, enjoy the show, baby. That's why we're here, bro. This is Real Tech Talk. Boom shakalaka. So who the hell are you, bro? You know, what are you into? What do you do? Yo, you can keep it real here. Tell me about these real estate players.
Eric Brody is the managing principal of CEMVC LLC. All opinions expressed by Eric and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of CEMVC LLC. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of CEMVC LLC may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
As you guys know, it's next episode. I got my boy Rowie here today. Rowie, thank you for coming on, man. I know it was a storm out there and you were concerned.
Yeah. Almost bailed on you, but I ended up making it after all. And thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Of course. So now before we get into the technology that you're doing and what's like honestly is absolutely incredible, and I think every single one of my audience is going to completely understand and feel the pain of what you're solving for, it was so close to you not coming, and yet this guy, if you understand what he did in his past, is like the head quarterback of like the biggest university in America as to what he did in his service in the background, and yet still needed to ask the boss whether he was allowed to come. And I tried my best. I tried my absolute best to peer pressure you, but I finally got you here. So thanks again for coming, brother, man.
Yeah. It was a close call. The schools were getting shut down. The wife was giving me a hard time about coming to the city.
But he knew it was big time. This is the number one PropTech podcast in the country. How do you not come through, bro?
This is the big leagues. I couldn't say no.
All right, awesome. Well, listen, what I find always the most interesting is tell us a little bit about your past, that how you got into technology, because it had absolutely nothing to do with it. Now, I can fill in all the gaps because I read all about you, but I'd love to hear it from the source.
Yeah, sure. So, I didn't imagine the story evolving the way that it did, but early years, just straight into the Army. I graduated as a fighter pilot, and that meant that I had to stay in the Air Force for a bunch of years.
Did you have one of those cute outfits like we see in Tom Cruise and Top Gun?
Top Gun. We love Top Gun because it always makes us feel good. Educating the population about what it's like.
Yeah, what it's really like to be an Air Force fighter pilot. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, they actually did a pretty good job with that second one, I would say. In any case, so while we were doing that, me and a couple of buddies of mine were throwing some parties, and you're young. You just want to have fun.
I'm sorry. So just so everyone knows, first and foremost is like, what is the fighter pilot like selection? That's like 20,000 people for 20? What percent is that? Half a point? 0.1?
I'm actually surprised you know the numbers.
Thank you. We do some research here.
It's not very likely to graduate. And honestly, I didn't feel I deserved it, but someone thought.
But what are those skill sets? Just tell me, what's the high level that even, how do you have to operate for that? I mean, obviously, I guess a physical skill, but something with brain activity, like, what is it?
You need to be kind of relaxed under pressure. That's the one thing that I think is one of the main qualities. You need to be able to learn pretty quickly. There's a saying in the Air Force that you can teach a 7-year-old grandma to fly an F-16, but it's going to take a long time.
And you don't have time.
Exactly. So you want to...
So quick acting, learn fast, right? I guess adaptability, right? Yeah. These are all great things for anything to deal with in the future.
And then the motor skills should be, above average, I would say. Some people are operating more from the brain side. Some other people have more of hands.
It brings up something that's fascinating to me. There's this concept called Mushin. and you see it in the Last Samurai with another fucking Tom Cruise movie. But basically, it's like, mine your enemy, mine the sword, mine this, mine that. And the guy's like, no mind. Like, you just have to act, right?
Yeah,
and I assume it must be a lot of that. Once you learn the skill, you just got to be able to execute.
Yeah, I think once you're there, you kind of feel it's a little bit overrated. But yeah, I think that was a great period of my life. Learned a ton. And
so then you graduate or you get out, right? I mean, you do your time.
And a lot of people get kind of confused. A lot of people, by the way, stay there for their entire career. You can retire pretty early on. And some people decide to move to the next thing. And it's kind of a weird situation to be in. Not easy to adapt to. We did something a little bit.
By the way, when you say
unordinary.
we, is that you, yourself, and I? Or
No, I was
about?
saying before, I should repeat that. So me and two of my friends from the squadron, we were in the same class. So we graduated and we kind of left the army at the same time. So we were both sharing the dilemma of what we're going to do next.
Okay, cool.
And being good friends, we want to do something together. So I think counterintuitively, we went and opened a bar or a mini club.
Because I see how technology goes right into nightclubs and bars, bro.
So it was more about having fun and kind of releasing a little bit of the tension of being in the Air Force for so long.
And it turned out to be a hot spot, no?
And my parents, I remember saying, like, don't throw away the money that you saved in the military, and this is never going to work out. But then it actually succeeded.
Wow.
And when you succeed in something, you kind of get dragged into it. So we had opened a bunch of bars and restaurants in Tel Aviv.
Amazing.
There's still a little bit of leftover. One restaurant called Vicky Cristina and Secret Garden, which is a pretty nice nightlife.
Wait, Vicky
place.
Cristina is what's the name of
tapas.
that?
Oh yeah, Vicky Cristina Barcelona.
Yeah,
it's a great movie. And it actually
was that the influence?
Yeah, that was the inspiration. Okay. It's kind of like a tapas scouty place outdoors.
Very cool, romantic
and kind of sexy even. And then.
So now, was that your first taste of real estate, structuring leases?
So we got, there's a lot of business experience you're gonna get.
I imagine it's an operating business.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we had 350 employees at some point. The churn is very high. So you got to be good at training people and recruiting. A lot of different challenges. Also, the margins are very low. So you have to run the business in a way that you're supervising things very closely. And it's also not a VC-backed venture. So when you lose money, and you will at some point.
I mean, daily battle, I assume.
You're going to have to pay for it. So that was a lot of lessons learned there. Once we got a little bit older, starting getting a little bit more serious with girlfriends and potential marriage.
Oh, they started kicking you out. The pressure. The pressure came, huh?
No, at some point, it becomes a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. And we thought about what would be the next step for us. That's when we transitioned into real estate. And knowing a lot of people, it was pretty easy for us to...
What was the transition, though? What was the first career?
So
into
the
real
first
estate.
one was
So you did hospitality, right? Military hospitality, and then you switched to real estate. But in what aspect?
So the first deal was honestly, opportunity was brought to us to participate in kind of 50-50 structure with a group of developers. And the idea was that we would handle marketing just because we knew a lot of people. It was easy for us to sell apartments.
And were you also doing like F&B for the building or interior design for it?
We were solely on the first one, was solely focused on marketing and actually learning, because we knew back then that we want to learn how to do it and then eventually run our own show.
Okay.
So we were kind of listening and taking notes and learning from their experience. It was a pretty successful construction and kind of development project. And right after that, we started doing running additional deals.
As a developer, your role.
As developers.
And builders.
And builders. So that was kind of the second. And I think a couple of episodes ago, you probably interviewed one of my partners who still is running that company that evolved from those early buildings that we were developing, and it's called City People.
No, I interviewed him, just so you know, not on this podcast, just in a different circumstance. But he was a massive builder developer in the city. Yeah. I mean, in Tel Aviv, which was really interesting based on the zoning change that he was really capitalizing on.
So that's what our company evolved into, and he's one of those three people that I was describing earlier. So he's one of my best buddies till this day, and is being very successful in building this specific company.
So that's fascinating. So far, this is all like brick and mortar life, right? I mean, obviously, some technology within the when you were flying planes, obviously, and then going into hospitality always seems like super creative.
Yeah.
Pivoting that into sort of a business that's process driven, like real estate development and construction. So then, why technology? It seems to be that everything was sort of that you were touching was working. Why did you then pivot into technology? And then let's talk about what you had identified and why you even got into this and what the business is doing.
Yeah, so I always felt that I was getting dragged into this experience. It's one thing to get out of the army and start this bar. It's another thing to get into this whole, first career, second career.
Yeah,
and I didn't feel that any of that was planned, and always felt very drawn to technology. Always felt like I had a little bit more to contribute. And I was generally, I think this day and age, people don't work 40 years in the same thing anymore. That doesn't exist.
Well, you didn't seem like, you don't even say 5 years in the same thing, or maybe like 7 is your max.
So for me, it always feels like around like a 7 to 10 is where.
So what was the tipping point? What happened? You fell, you hit your head, you saw the flex capacitor?
Yeah. There was a few things. First and foremost, just, sharing mistakes proudly. There was a development project I was involved in, and that the person that was supposed to do the actual construction went bankrupt, which created a very messy situation for us. And I experienced that firsthand. Mm-hmm. And, talking about all these different career moves, I can tell you that everything that I did was never, it always seemed like from the side, it looks like, oh, this is such a great success. But if you're building these businesses and you're running them on a day-to-day basis, you know that you're going to be full of scars by the time that you graduate.
No, I mean, I empathize so much because it's an interesting facet of construction and development, which is you could be absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
and still, like you're saying, here's a third party. You had nothing that you were responsible. The buck stops with you. They fail. You have nothing to do with it. That's their own issue. And as a result of that, with so much stress and pressure on you, you're like, that's awful. That it doesn't matter how good I am.
Yeah. At that moment in time, after I went through this whole thing, we funded a lot of it, and I had to deal with all the different tenants.
Yeah.
By the time that project ended, I felt a little bit exacerbated. I was like, okay, I need a break from this thing for a while.
Yeah, I think the audience doesn't understand that. If you speak to developers right now in New York City, many of them are just like, I get to the end and there's no pot of gold and I'm still getting beat up by everyone. I don't know if I want to do this, right?
Yeah.
So your experience was like interesting and smart. You were like, I'm out. So how did that?
I didn't do exactly out, but just because we had additional resources and we had Ron and we had additional people that weren't that exposed to this and were still willing to keep going.
Yeah,
I think that was one piece of it. The second piece of it was just our restaurant business and the hospitality business, where we felt a lot of the mature businesses that we were holding were no longer worth it.
Yeah.
And so we found different arrangements where we kind of passed them along, either someone to manage them or sold them, and that essentially cleared it for the first time since we got out of the army. It cleared the table a little bit, where you were in a position to sit down and think about what you wanted to do with your life.
And how did then PropTech come in?
And then I actually met my brother, today my co-founder, Roey Dor, and he had an interesting life. A very, very smart kid since the early days. Was programming from a 5-year-old, something that you don't see much. And he went to 8200 in the Israeli military, and then studied in the Technion, physics and electric engineering, double bachelor, finished first.
So let me just so that is analogous to our audience. It's like if Tom Brady partnered with Jeff Bezos, right, and came together, it would be Obligo. Is that what we're saying here?
I don't know, but I like the fact that you're comparing me to Tom Brady. In any case, so he had a bunch of different ideas. And he was interviewing co-founders, and over dinner at our parents' house on a Friday night, we were kind of having a conversation. And the funny thing, we didn't exchange a lot of words previously because the age difference is pretty big. It's like a 7.5-ish.
Who's older?
I'm older. Uh-huh. And so when I went to the army, he was like 10. We didn't really communicate too deeply. And so for the first time when we started this venture, we were actually bonding as brothers.
Oh, wow.
And I found a great business partner. And
so it was
brilliant
his.
man.
It was the kernel
So
of his
it's
idea.
Definitely his idea.
But what? So do you know like what he was seeing in the space that he was like, we should attack this?
He was working for Google in the Valley, and Google in New York, and Facebook in London. So he was traveling a lot. I was based in Israel the whole time, and he saw these different
what did he say?
Friction points around just renting.
Okay.
And so initially, the holistic idea was that someone needed to come into this relationship between the renter and the landlord and help build trust. And he gave me a couple of examples, which I thought were great, right? Take Uber, for example.
Why? So the issue was he felt that the landlord and the tenant couldn't trust each other, and that technology could build that gap.
There is a lot of friction points. If you think about screening, the deposit, the things in the agreement, a lot of things that are byproducts of the fact that you can't really trust the renter, or the renter doesn't really trust the landlord.
100%. The landlord is literally doing a criminal, I don't know if you're allowed criminal, but doing a credit background check on a tenant, and the tenant is like, I can pay the rent, and now I have to prove that I can pay the rent in order to live in your space. It's inherently like this landlord-tenant. I feel like books and movies are written about this relationship.
Yeah, think about a situation where you're going to rent the apartment to your son, right? And think about all the things that would disappear from the process because there's such a high level of trust between you guys or a family member. So trying to bring this into, and think about big companies, eBay, Uber, Airbnb. They were able to build trust between, the person that's driving the car and the passenger, or the person that's buying the bicycle from China and the person that's selling it. And when you're able to build this trust, then you're creating a lot of value, because now people can transact in a new way.
But let's talk about distrust for a second. So this is what Obligo is doing, right? Creating trust between the landlord and the tenant. And then you'll tell me specifically, because my audience wants to know what it is,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that what you're saying is that, like, for the landlord, he's got to pay a mortgage. He's got to know that the money's good, right? So he's like, all right, these guys are actually paying and coming in. Now, the tenant, on the other hand, gets a certain amount of services for those dollars, and he also is getting an employee of a company, right? The money has to come to him in order to give, right? So there's a lot of different friction points, and that trust needs to be built into the process.
And it's the biggest transaction, right? For the renter, it's the biggest transaction, biggest line item in their budget. And for the landlord, the owner, it's also their most expensive, usually their most expensive assets.
Correct.
So there's a lot of...
And we were hearing all about it, right? We were hearing all throughout the pandemic how these small landlords couldn't get the tenant to pay. We're getting foreclosed out, and we're saying, like, what do you want me to do? They don't have their job, and then the bank is like, F you, pay me, right?
Yeah,
there was no, they were trying to work with them. So this was a real problem actually happening at the same time.
Yeah, and then, but when he was kind of trying to, to narrow it down to what we should focus on, because these ideas are sometimes a little bit too big to try to solve at once.
So what did Obligo solve?
We focused on one byproduct of lack of trust that we felt was the most painful, and it's creating burden on both landlords and renters.
And what was it?
And that was the security deposit. And we felt, first and foremost, we noticed just the sheer amount of money that is being buried underground. And it's billions of dollars, right? Everyone has a deposit buried underground.
And the landlord can't even use that money. Like, if you understand the law, they just put in an account. Maybe if they're lucky, it's interest bearing. I don't even know if they're allowed to, but they got to give it back. So it's just a pain in the ass to a landlord, right?
Yeah,
and a tenant, they have to front money, right? You have to front additional money. So what was the solution?
So we decided to look at different industries and try to come up with something that works somewhere else. And we ended up with hotels and the hospitality industry. And when you check into a hotel, you swipe your card. You're not doing this because you can't afford a deposit. You're doing this because it's a much easier way to interact with the hotel.
Yeah, you stress out for like 10 seconds instead of for a year, right? You're like, wait, but you're not going to charge it. They're like, no, only if you then use the money then or mess something up do we charge it.
So we wanted to create a similar solution for real estate and long-term leasing. And we couldn't use
a ton of sense.
Cards because of different limitations, and ended up using open banking, which means the renters are providing us with a bank account. They plug in their bank account. We take a quick look at their financials and financial history in the bank. And then we decide if they can live deposit free. And if they can, they're presented with an option to actually pay us a fee and avoid paying the deposit, in which case we act like Visa. We would front the money. If there's a charge, we would front the money to the landlord, and they would need to pay us back. And the
So
other
that's
option
almost-
is to pay a traditional deposit electronically.
So that's fascinating. So you're like, all right, you pay a fee to not have to put up your money, which allows them to go around and maybe make more money somewhere else, right? I mean, that theoretically.
Depending
right?
on the price, and especially in this environment with just interest rates going through the roof, there's a lot of different things that you can do with your money. More importantly, a lot of people have credit card debt, and student. There's just a lot of different things that you can do with the money if you're financially savvy.
And as long as they do the right thing.
Yeah, a
And
lot
then-
of people buy shoes and
Yeah, obviously.
and travel. Right? We can't control it, but we're trying to educate people to do the
So that's amazing. So they pay a fee. They give you the credit card information, so your risk as Obligo isn't massive. Your biggest risk would be to collect if and you already have access to an account. They pay a fee to not have to put up the money. You're taking that risk, or that you're making that fee in the middle of it. And then if there's an issue, your risk is also mitigated because you're kind of tied in. That's somewhat genius. And the landlord knows now that they have a company that's stepping in to give them the money if they had to, and they don't have to put up the money. That's a fantastic solution. So how is it going?
So it's going pretty well. One thing that I would bring in is that we partnered with Wells Fargo so that our promise would be backed by letters of credit to the landlord, right? Because we can make all the promises we want.
Right, but if everyone failed at the same time, you're like
Once we
insurance,
get to-
you're
exactly,
toast,
exactly.
right?
So we're working in this partnership with Wells Fargo, and at the back of our model, instead of insurance, we just have letters of credit from a bank.
So how is the company doing in general? And what's its trajectory as a company?
Yeah, it's been going pretty well. I have to say that last year was kind of a mixed blend. On the one hand, we didn't see a lot of move-ins. I think in general, there was a little bit of stagnation in the market. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but I won't get into it now. And at the same time, we were able to make very big partnerships happen for us. In the way that we're thinking about scale and distribution, there's let's take three approaches and compare them. One is go directly to consumer.
Right.
That's pretty hard because you have to find people in the right time and also convince their landlord to use this product. So it's going to be
It's like creating a marketplace. It's rough.
Exactly. The other option is to convince the landlords to use it, and then they would offer it to the renters, which is how we started.
Right, because they have the units.
That's B2B2C.
Yeah.
So you would convince the landlord that for them, it's a pain in the ass to run the deposits.
Agreed.
And then that there's a lot of benefit and to be made. So this is what we were doing up until 2 years.
Oh, so the benefit to the landlord, which we didn't explain, is you don't have to deal with this account that you're managing and yet you don't make any money from.
Exactly. You're getting a marketing benefit. Deposit-free units are more attractive to renters. And the second part of it is just the overhead, the admin, that taking this money.
Oh, but the other one's interesting too. It's almost as if that unit is more valuable because I don't have to put up the money as a deposit.
Exactly.
We got this company who's going to do it for you for a small fee. So now you may even have an advantage in the marketplace in leasing up. But unless you get that message out to the B2C, it gets lost like a fart in the breeze.
Exactly. And then after we were doing that, we noticed there was a lot of friction around the current property management software that these landlords were using. And we had to integrate to all of these moving parts in order to reflect the whole
Which are the
situation.
classic ones. I think Andreessen Horowitz did an article on. It's like, what are they? Appfolio and
Yardi, MRI, and Entrada.
And everyone's saying like there's a huge market to disrupt that because that's like, even though I know it's new tech, it's old tech,
yeah,
right?
Some of them are older, some of them are newer. But the bottom line is we made a little bit of a pivot internally and decided it would be more effective to try to sell directly to software vendors.
And how's that going?
And that's been really, for us, I think, the point where we clicked product market fit and saw the exponential growth really kick into gear. And the reason is pretty simple. And I think that's an interesting lesson to people that are trying to develop their own products. There's this conception that if I add value to my product, and I would find enough value, right? I would add more features and functionalities.
All the time.
If I find this value that is just high enough, my product is just going to be going crazy. I'll find the product market fit, and it would just get sold. And people sometimes don't give enough weight to the other axis, which is friction. If it's hard to use your product, people are generally lazy and they have other priorities.
Yeah.
So you can add all the value you want. It's not gonna happen.
There's no
quickly enough,
adoption.
and there's not gonna be a high enough conversion rate on your product. So by shifting to selling to software, one of the biggest things that we were actually doing is we're not trying to develop more features anymore. We're just trying to streamline the process so that a landlord would push a button and this would just start working automatically.
And they're the ones penetrating the market,
exactly,
right?
And that's when you see the adoption going through the roof. Conversion rate went 3x, right? Every partner that we used to try to demo would convert in a certain rate. Now it's 3x the rate because they don't need to really do any work.
So let me ask you this question. So where are you at as a company? Series A, C, B?
We're post B. We raised a little over $50 million in 3 rounds. And we're
It's one of the biggest companies we had on here then.
We're in a pretty good situation because we raised in the really late stages of 2021. Which means from a runway perspective,
through 2022, right?
Yeah, so we were kind of we're in a position where our runway is pretty significant. But I have to tell you that it's really I have a lot of friends in the industry and a lot of people that have raised rounds in a previous year, in 2020, and we're hoping to fundraise in 2022. Are in a really rough situation.
But are you now are you making money on that? Are you getting MRR? Is it now actually, because to me, I got to tell you, it's like one of those, you kept it simple, stupid, and killed it. Like, no shit, that's a great solution.
Yeah.
Right? So now is the question, as a business model, is it working?
Yeah, it's working really good. We're seeing the margins holding steady and actually growing a little bit over time. And as I said before, adoption and the partnerships with millions of units, it's just the scalability of the solution is pretty massive.
How many units are you in right now?
So, through partners, we have close to 8 million in our network.
Damn. Yeah.
But there's this process of penetrating into this portfolio. So it's not an immediate penetration. It's going to take probably a year or two before we actually...
And how many units are there total? I know that those companies 45. Are not running. 45.
Yeah, 45 million.
So even if you get all of that, you still have a huge growth model.
And this is not just a US problem, right? So this is something that you can, through some of these software companies, you can penetrate other markets that they're already operating in.
No wonder it was such an opportunity for people to invest. I missed it, so it looks like I'm not getting in. But let me ask you, tell my audience something. What are you learning about today's marketplace? Tie it back into affordability. What are you learning about the consumers today? You told me something yesterday I thought was absolutely fascinating. What's going on with the normal American household right now?
Yeah, so the first thing that is no secret is people are eating into their savings in a way that I don't think we've seen in the last 20 years.
Scary.
And that's pretty scary. Credit card usage going up very dramatically. Fastest clip in the last 20 years on defaults on credit cards.
Wow.
So American people need cash. And there's a lot of different things that you can do. Well, at the same time, right? Inflation is still not completely stopping, and there's a lot of other effects on the households. So the first thing that we're feeling is that the demand for the product from a consumer standpoint is a little bit higher. And by the way, we do take into account that there's going to be a little bit more of the default rates are going to go up.
Yeah, you better be careful.
Yeah, so
Wells Fargo won't be happy.
Yeah, so you need to definitely understand and kind of control the risk to the best of your ability. Q2 and Q3, most banks are predicting that there's going to be a little bit of a meltdown. We don't exactly know what would be the scale of it, but people are currently still surviving. At some point, you're just on getting to that default level. So depending on a lot of different things, there's a much smarter and more educated people to give forecasts about the market. But I think
give us a forecast. That's a crazy one.
That's one
people
that
really heard that. The American people are burning into their savings, burning off that cash, and you're seeing it literally in the renter space throughout the country because you are covering now 8 million units around the country.
So we're seeing that definitely. The other thing that we're seeing, and I think we spoke about yesterday, is people are not buying homes. And when people don't buy homes, they're not graduating, right? Think about it like a high school.
Sure.
And you're supposed to graduate and leave the school, but you're not graduating.
Yeah.
So the school is becoming pretty crowded. And what we're seeing is just the vacancy rates as a result of that. And also people are finding it pretty hard to rent a new home. So there's a significant slowdown in move-in rates People are not moving in as
I mean, think about it. I guess back in the day, renting and owning were similar, and then you went for the appreciation. But now the deposit and the cost of owning is so great.
Yeah,
even paying more in rent, or you have no savings to put it down. That's a serious issue. I wonder what if we were to project that, what actually occurs.
So I think a lot of people realize when they do the math, they would go and try to find a house, and then they would, go into the weeds with the mortgage, understand the rates and the monthly cost.
Yeah.
And when they see that, they're like, wait a minute, I'm going to be renting, right? Because think about how you're paying back the bank. You're paying back interest only for the first few years.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm just going to be renting at a similar price from the bank, and I'm putting all this capital aside. So when in rent versus buy, again, depending on the rates and just the cost, it's not trivial in these days that it's a smart decision.
And then you're reading about from that dude Mike Del Pret, Open Door and Zillow. They all got rocked on the appreciation, right? Because the only reason you then take that risk would be the appreciation. So personally, as a prediction, I think in the next year or two you should buy because you're going to get the appreciation of a recovery, right? Just from what you're saying, and that would be like a buy indicator because they're getting rocked, they're selling at a loss. Get in there as long as it's similar to the rent, and then maybe you'll get up and get the upside.
Yeah, and also I think experts are predicting the market will get a little softer. So some of the deals out there, we might see some more reasonable pricing for new homes you want to purchase.
Amazing. So listen, I could probably talk to you all day, but there's the most important question that we always ask. So besides all of this business and obligo and technology, what do you do to create equilibrium in your personal life?
Wow. I'm doing a couple of things. I actually had a little shift since I relocated to the U.S. So I used to be a surfer. That was my thing.
Yeah, it'd be really cold to surf here. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, I'm actually surfing here, but just the traveling and the whole kind of situation is a little bit more complicated. I need to do something on a more frequent basis. So mountain biking is something I picked up here. It's much more dangerous, unfortunately, but
what do you mean, about sharks?
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I broke my collarbone a couple of months back. I can
imagine you're not just going on a little mud. I imagine you're searching for some gnarly stuff, Yeah,
adrenaline is definitely a part that has to be in there. So that's one thing. A little bit of skiing, a lot of family time. Got 3 daughters, teaching them to ski.
That's that high tea. You can't make boys, huh?
Exactly.
If you did it again, there'd be another woman in your life.
Exactly. Told my wife, let's cut our losses.
So listen, before we go, because I really appreciate you, I must tell you, you have a fantastic haircut. Yeah, I love it, dude. Do you know?
Similar, mine is a little bit worse than yours. But give it time, buddy. Give it time.
Listen, I appreciate you coming through the snowstorm, brother. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
These are the conclusions, and these are the things that really matter. Did you hear what he said about what's happening in the marketplace? He's telling you Americans are not saving money. They're spending their savings, okay? You're hearing about that the single-family homes are losing value. I mean, we are running into some serious issues. What is actually going to happen in the marketplace? How can technology actually make it better? Well, he's got one solution, which was we'll put up the deposit capital for you. Don't mess up the unit. Don't make us have to spend the money. And for you get to save that money and maybe assist on some of the bills and the savings that you had. Now, unfortunately for me, I like to invest. And if I would have met this dude like 5 years ago, I would have put my money down. But he blew up. He's huge. There's no opportunity for us to put in money. But man, these are the type of guys that we want to be interviewing because they have made this solution that we want to hear. Now, as you know, we're getting into the business of rescuing, not on that scale, but on a much larger scale. So stay tuned. Listen up. We're bringing in the hottest technology in this space. Let's go. Real tech talk, people. Come say what's up to the big E Breezy when you see me on the street. I'm always down. And oh, by the way, like and follow.